Hello, everybody. It's Peter McLaughlin with Blue Sky Hypnosis. This is Friday Live at 5. Welcome once again. Today, we're going to be talking about understanding and clearing spiritual attachments. Before we get into that, just want to thank you for your patience. I know I've been gone for 2 Fridays, been traveling away from my home state. I'm still gone. I actually thought I was going to be back by now, but that's why I'm going to be broadcasting from a different location with a different camera. So hopefully you'll bear with me, I'm speaking too fast. So if you have any questions today, please make sure you ask those questions. If you have comments, make the comments. If you have topics and content that you'd like to see in the future, either on my main sort of content, static content, Blue Sky Hypnosis, or for future lives, please make sure you make those requests, those suggestions. I really count on you guys for helping me to understand what it is that works for you and what you need. Standard disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. I am not a psychologist. I am a hypnotherapist and a life coach, and I've been working for 15 years with people one-on-one doing this work. That's where my information comes from. Take everything you hear from me with a grain of salt. Without further ado, I guess we'll get into talking about what spiritual entities are. So if you think of yourself as having both a soul and a physical body, a spiritual entity would be a person whose physical body has died, but their spirit is still existing on this plane. It hasn't gone into what we would call the light. So other people might call that heaven, other people might call it Valhalla or Eden or the afterlife or the life between lives. That's where we're supposed to go when we die. And you can go onto YouTube and other platforms like BitChute and type in NDE for near-death experience, and you can hear people talking about what it's like to no longer have a heartbeat, to no longer have brainwaves, and how they still have consciousness, and how most of them will talk about entering a realm, usually with a lot of light, where they feel this incredible, intense love. So the people who don't go into that light, who remain on this plane, on this earth plane, I would call them spiritual beings, spiritual entities that no longer have a physical body. And an attachment is when one of those energetic forms of life, call it a spirit, finds a way to attach itself to a human being. Now, why would they do that? Well, you can imagine how important it is to have a physical body, to be on this planet, to experience this life the way we experience this life. So we can taste food. We can feel the touch of a loved one. We can hold a baby in our arms. We can hear beautiful music. We can communicate with each other. We can have all of these experiences. And a person who no longer has a physical body can't have those experiences. That's one of the reasons that they might want to attach themselves to a living human. Now, when that happens, it creates issues. It creates problems. So you can think of one of the other ways I think about a physical spiritual attachment is a parasite. So we know what it's like to have a physical parasite, like, for example, in your gastrointestinal tract, and how you can continue functioning, but it can really disrupt all kinds of things about the way your body functions. It can even disrupt the things that you might be craving. So you might be craving sugar or carbs, and it may not actually be you that's craving that. It may be the parasites that are craving that. Now, in the same way, the spiritual attachments or the energetic parasites can also sort of corrupt your thoughts. And your thoughts then translate into emotions. So it can then, by transitivity, corrupt your emotions. And your emotions govern your actions. So you can see how this chain of cause and effect could sort of influence your life, probably in sort of negative ways. I would say of the 15 years that I've been practicing as a hypnotist and a life coach, it's really only been in, say, the last 3 years that with every single client with whom I work, I'm helping them to scan to see if they have these entities attached to them, because it's way more common than I would have previously thought or understood. I definitely ran into it years and years ago, but again, it wasn't something that I thought was as common as it is, and I do think it's quite common. So one of the questions people might ask, and I put it in my email that I sent out recently, I only sent this thing out today, a few hours ago, because as I said, I've been traveling and my schedule changed and was kind of surprised that I'm still on the road. All good, but still surprised that I'm still on the road. So I got things out much, much later than I normally would. So people might want to know, how can you get a physical or a spiritual entity that attaches to you? So the sort of three most common ways would be, number one, if you're in a prolonged period of a negative emotion. So if a person is in a deep, dark depression, they become open, if you will, to a spiritual entity attaching. Another way would be, probably the most common way, would be drugs and alcohol. And one of the things that I thought was amazing when I first learned this was, in English, we call alcohol alcohol, we call it liquor, and we also call it spirits. And one of the things that I like to say is that if you can be under the influence of alcohol, then by definition, you can be under the influence of spirits. And people who drink a lot of alcohol, or even had a period in their life when they drank a lot of alcohol, I have found pretty much a close to a 100% correlation between people who drank heavily and people who have spiritual entities attached to them. Now, the people who drank very, very heavily tend to have more spiritual entities attached to them than people who might have been drinking heavily for a short period of time. But there's a very strong correlation, at least in my practice, and from what I have found anecdotally, if you will. The other way for entities to attach commonly is for people who have intimate relations with a person who themselves has entities attached to them. And in that way, it's almost like you can think of it as a spiritual STD, where the entity can transfer from the one person to the other with whom they're having intimate relations. There are certainly there are some other ways that this can happen, but they're far less common in my experience. So, for example, if a person is kind of dabbling in the occult, if they're dabbling especially in darkness, if they're doing seances and so forth, that is a way that an entity or an attachment could be this kind of spiritual parasite that I was talking about. Okay, so let us see who is here and if there are any questions or comments, because that's really what makes this so interesting for me, is when it becomes more of a conversation rather than just a one-way me talking into the camera. Okay, so there is English Rose. Cool, you're here. It's good to see you, English Rose. She says, "Hi, Peter. I just wanted to thank you for the last session I did with you. It helped me and my husband get back together. And since I have really been in touch with my feelings, happy to see you back." That is awesome. That deserves a round of applause for you and for your husband. Congratulations to both of you. So Sally Walker says, "Do you do sections?" I think what you mean, Sally, it's probably just a typo. Do you do sessions, right? So yeah, I do. And you probably gathered from what English Rose just said that she mentioned here that we work together. She's done sessions with me, and she has this really wonderful news that she just announced that she and her husband have gotten back together since our last session. So yes, I definitely do sessions. You can find information on that on my website, which is BlueSkyHypnosis.com. And then here is Heather Marney. Good to see you, Heather. And this looks like Greek letters. Can you let me know if that's Greek? Sally Walker saying, "How do I book a session?" Again, you just go to my website, BlueSkyHypnosis.com. Seashell says hello. And here is Kelly Katzis. Kelly says, "If I want to be thought hypnosis in practice, where should I search for it? Is there a school I can do it? If I want to be thought hypnosis in practice." So Kelly, are you asking, do you want to learn how to be a hypnotist, or is it a different question? If I want to be taught, okay, there it is. So one of the places I guess you could look is there's something called the National Guild of Hypnotists, and their website is ngh.net. They're the largest professional organization of hypnotists, and they have a whole series of links where you can be trained, and that's all around the world. They're okay. I don't think they're phenomenal. Honestly, that's not where I got my training. Mine was the Hypnotherapy Academy of America, and they were based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Now they're based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I thought that they were outstanding. There's another group that does a conference every year. I think it's twice a year. The big one's in the summer, the small ones in the winter, and they're called Hypnothoughts. And you can look them up online, and they undoubtedly will have a variety of links to places where you can get training. But you might want to check around, check with different schools, ask what the curriculum is about, ask if you can talk to graduates of the school, because it's really kind of the Wild West in terms of training. Some kind of mediocre or not so good training, and some training that's really, really good. So I would recommend that you just kind of search around with some of those resources I gave you. So good luck. All right. And here is 30-Day Jeff. What's a good indicator that you have a high potential to be hypnotized for a regression session? Are there any indicators? The answer to that question is yes. And I'm gonna pivot off of it. It's a really good question, but lots of hypnotists will use different kinds of indicators. They will give certain kinds of suggestibility tests. So one quick example of a suggestibility test is called a balloon and bucket. So you have a person stand up, eyes closed, they put their arms out like this, side by side, and you tell them, imagine that in your left hand, there is a balloon tied to your wrist, and more helium is placed into the balloon, and it's pulling your arm up, 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 up. And in your right arm, there's a bucket of water that you're holding onto, and more water is being added to the bucket. So for the hypnotist watching this person, a person who's highly suggestible, you'll see their arms kind of go like this, as they imagine one arm being lifted up and the other arm being dragged down by the heavy weight of the water in the bucket. That is something that, as I say, it's a really common suggestibility test. I have, over the 15 years, kind of moved away from all of that, because my belief and my experience is that anyone, all human beings, can be hypnotized. And that if they understand what hypnosis is and what it isn't, and you determine if they have any blocks, and if they do, you eliminate those blocks, that they can go right where you need them to go. It's not the kind, when you're doing it for the purposes that I work with my clients on, it's not like what you would see in a stage show where somebody is, clucking on the stage like a chicken, or they're speaking in Martian, or they're, in the adult shows, they're taking off their pants and making love to a chair or something. It's nothing like that whatsoever. It's way more of an internal experience that you could almost say feels like a meditation, like a guided meditation. In fact, the state of meditation and hypnosis are exactly the same. It really, the work that I'm doing with people helps people to access their inner wisdom. And it's that inner wisdom that already knows what the problem is, where once we resolve it at that deep level, that's where these big breakthroughs occur. So hopefully I answered your question, and thanks for asking. Here's Miriam. Happy to see you too, Miriam. Glad you're here. Here is Florida Lisa. Hi, everyone. Peter, I emailed you about 3 weeks ago, and I need to connect with you regarding a session, but also training. Okay, so hopefully I got back to you. Let me know if I didn't get back to you. I thought I did, but if I didn't, let me know. And looking forward to connecting to you with you whenever you want. And just, for you, Florida Lisa, and for anybody else, I do offer 20-minute free conversations. So if you are interested, but you don't really want to book a session yet, you just want to talk and ask some questions or whatever, you can certainly do that. And again, on my website, under booking, you can just select a 20-minute free conversation, and I call you at the appointed day and time, and I can answer your questions and we can talk through things. All right. And here is Sally Walker saying the website isn't working. That's BlueSkyHypnosis.com. If it's not working like in the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes, because I was on there maybe a half an hour ago and it was working fine. But I will look into it after this live, just in case something has happened in the intervening 30 minutes. Here is Double P. Hi, Peter. Thank you for this opportunity. So, the spiritual attachment is a negative experience in your practice. I'm actually curious about the subject as I feel my grandmother's spirit. So, really good point. And and you can feel somebody's spirit, and let me just move that off. You can feel somebody's spirit, but not have them attached to you for a prolonged period of time. An attachment is only negative insofar as we tend to lose some degree of our autonomy when an entity that doesn't want to go to the light is attached to us. So that's really kind of the main focus of today. They don't want to go to the light for some kind of, call it a negative reason. So they may think that they're going to go to hell because of how they behaved in this life, and so they just refuse to go to the light. It may be that they are really attached to this plane or to a house that they worked years for or whatever, and so they don't want to leave. That's what I think is a haunted house, by the way. Or it could be confused. It could be an entity who's confused. It could be a small child who's confused. So it doesn't necessarily mean like it's a dark or evil or bad person. In fact, I think that's extremely rare. I think it has more to do with a person who might be angry, a person who might be confused, a person who might be most commonly fearful. So those are the entities that we're talking about. Yes, you can definitely connect with your grandmother. You know, I can connect with my grandfather and my uncle, and I do it every day when I go into self-hypnosis and meditation. And I can talk to them. I can ask them questions. I can hear what they have to say to me. But they're not attached to me in that sense of what's the best way to describe it? Sometimes I think of a person who's drowning in the ocean, and you come near them. What's going to happen if you take like a life-saving course is they're going to grab onto you for and push you down to get another breath of air. They can actually drown both of you in their desperation and in their fear. So that's how I perceive these spiritual entities. And again, I know that there is sort of an evil thing. That's not what I'm talking about. This is way more common. This is 99.9% of the time. And the negativity would be they're bringing their depression, their fear, their anxiety, their anger, their guilt, their shame, all of those things. And it becomes almost part of you. And it becomes hard to tease apart, excuse me, where you begin and they end. And so when I find these with the clients with whom I work, we just first want to move that out and then find out where the client is. And oftentimes clients will say, oh my God, I feel so much better since we did that. And I never say that this is a panacea, but it's really important to move them out because without that, we don't know exactly what we're dealing with. And it can oftentimes bring enormous amounts of relief very quickly. All right, so hopefully that answered the question for you, PP. Actually, there's a second part to your question that says, you feel your grandmother around you all the time. And I've been told by 2 mediums that my daughter has the spirit of a grandmother attached to her. Is this a kind of spiritual attachment part of your practice? Yes, it does come up for sure. Sometimes a deceased relative will, and this can be a reason they don't go to the light. A deceased relative can be hanging on because they're worried about you. And if you think about that, worried about you, that is a negative reason as well, or a less positive reason, right? And so in that case, what we would want to do is we would want to find other support for either you or for your daughter so that the grandmother is free to go into the light because that's where she's supposed to be now. Once she's in the light, it doesn't mean you can't visit with them. One of the distinctions that I make is it's almost like the difference between someone, living in your spare bedroom full time and never leaving your house, and having them come visit you for 3 days or for a week once a year. That's kind of the difference, if you will. All right, thanks for asking the questions, and hopefully the answers made sense to you. Here's 30-Day Jeff. I was at an event laying on the floor with about 500 people in a big ballroom. They played music and lowered the lights, and they did that exact thing. Mine did go up a decent amount. 30-Day Jeff, I'm not sure if I understand exactly what you mean by that, whether they were doing a spirit releasement. Is that what was happening? If so, that's incredible. If they were doing 500 people all at once, I would love to know more about that. Here's Fiordalisa. Peter, I already have some training under Brian Weiss, but not enough to feel confident to use it with my clients. I'm an LCSWR. Yes, I do remember your email, and I remember writing back to you. And I hope you got my email, my return, because what I said was I'd be happy to talk to you and to determine if I can help you, kind of flesh out, use the training that you had with Brian Weiss as kind of a part of a foundation and help you build out that foundation so that you can feel more confident going and working with people one-on-one. Because I totally understand that it's such a huge topic. It's such an undertaught set of tools that it could be kind of intimidating to go from whatever the training was. I don't know whether it was a day or a few hours or a week or how long it was, but to go right from that, and there were probably a lot of people in the class, to go right from that into working with people, I could see that being kind of a little freaky. So, I'd be happy, as I said before, to have a conversation with you and just see, if I'm able to help you based on what you're looking for, and we could figure something out if the answer to that is yes. If not, I might be able to just answer some questions for you or what have you. So please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, or set up one of those free 20-minute calls that I was mentioning before on my website, BlueSkyHypnosis.com. But look forward to connecting with you when you feel like reaching out. All right. And so, oh yeah, okay, cool. So Fiordalisa saying she'll ask for the 20-minute free conversation. Yeah, you book that right on my website under booking at a time and day that's convenient for you, and that's open on my schedule. Awesome. Here is Jill Turner. Great question, Jill. Peter, how do you actually discern that an attachment or attachments plural are present? Very good question. So the first thing is, and I'm going to go in order of kind of less specific to more specific. So the first one is going to be kind of like a feeling, right? So if you have the feeling that somebody's standing behind you, at night when you get up to go to the bathroom, or you hear voices in your head, and you're not sure if they're yours, or you have thoughts that don't seem like you, or your life just doesn't seem like you, like something just seems off, that would be the first thing. Another thing would be, ask yourself the question, do I now or have I ever had a drug or alcohol addiction or a serious problem with that? Was I in an intimate relationship with a person who was kind of disturbed? And then the last, and sort of the last piece, and there's one more after that, is use a pendulum. That's the main tool that I use with my clients. And for those of you who don't know how to use a pendulum or don't really understand it, there's, a video on my channel. It's getting kind of old now. It does work, but I'm going to need to make a new one. I made it, I think, 3 years ago on how to use a pendulum. So go to Blue Sky Hypnosis as a YouTube channel, and then just type in pendulum, search all of my videos. It'll give you the video that shows you how to use a pendulum. This gives you a yes or no answer to any question that you ask. And so when I remake this, I'm going to do it specifically for attachments, because the last one was, how to use it to overcome a block to get into a past life regression hypnosis. But I use pendulums with my clients. They hold the pendulum, not me. I help them ask the questions to determine if they have an entity or a spiritual attachment. The next way would be to meet with your spirit guide or to meet with an ascended master. So if you don't know who your spirit guide is, there are videos on my channel that help you meet your spirit guide. You can also, as I said, meet with an ascended master. Now, for a Christian, that would be Jesus or Mary. For others, it could be Buddha, it could be Kuan Yin. There are other sort of famous ascended masters that you may already feel comfortable with. You can meet with the ascended master in this hypnotic state, And you can ask them, do I have any spiritual entities attached to me and or to my being? The reason I like to ask it that way is because we have more than just a physical body, right? We have something called an etheric or an energy body. And the entity may be attached to your physical body, or more likely might be attached to your energetic body. And if you just say, do I have an entity attached to me or attached to my body? It may say no. But when you ask the question, do I have an entity attached to me and or my being? It's covering a much wider range of the totality of who we are. And that's where you may get the hit. And then you'd want to ask, do I have more than one? Do I have more than five? Do I have more than 10? So you can ask your spirit guide, or you can ask an ascended master if you have these attachments. These would be the different ways. Hopefully that all made sense. Sometimes when I'm blathering, I'm not sure if it's all landing and making sense. But thanks for asking the question. All right. Here is Rosie Petals. Hi, Peter. How can you tell when someone has an attachment? Is it visual or through hypnosis? Thanks. So just to recap, Jill Turner's question was the same one. The main tool that I use is a pendulum, and the client is holding the pendulum when we're asking those questions. You can also check with the client's spirit guide or with an ascended master. And again, that's the client connecting with the ascended master or the spirit guide, not me. I'm just kind of guiding them to make that connection and then feeding them the questions to ask. Alrighty. And then the other thing that we will sometimes do, especially if you say, we have a client, let's say hypothetical client, Susan, and Susan has 8 spiritual entities attached to her. And we go through the process of removing the spiritual entities, and we remove 6 of them, but 2 of them remain. Okay, now we want to know why. Why were we not able to get rid of the other 2? Why would they not leave? The answer is almost invariably going to be because part of Susan doesn't want to let them go. Not consciously. Consciously, she wants to let them go, but subconsciously, she may be holding on to them. That's the number one reason why when you go through a removal and they don't all leave, that's the number one reason why they're not going, because part of her is holding on to them. So we could use the pendulum again, or we could use a spirit guide to find out who are these entities. You know, are one or both of them people that she knew in this life? Are one or both of them people that she knew in a past life? And start winnowing down on who these entities are. Because what if one or both of them are spirits of children and Susan had an abortion, or Susan had a miscarriage and she's holding on to them? We have to know that, because the releasing of them has to be, I'm going to say, sacred. It has to be really gentle and very kind to both Susan and to the entities. Okay, excuse me for that. English Rose. She says, the session I did with you was amazing. I definitely feel lighter since, and it released the shame and the guilt I was feeling, which was understandable given the attachment I had. Yeah, that is really beautiful. And thank you for sharing that, English Rose. As I've said before, to me, when people share their stories, it's a major inspiration, and you just don't know who's on this broadcast right now or who may watch the recording later that may be inspired by your story to follow a similar healing path. And it doesn't have to be with me. It can be other ways. But I think that human one-to-one inspiration of somebody overcoming something tells the rest of us that it's possible for us too. And I think that that's huge. So thank you for sharing that. Really appreciate it. And again, congratulations to you and to your husband as well. Oh, okay. So 30 Day Jeff is saying in the room with 500 people, he was doing a hypnotic suggestibility test called the balloon and bucket. And that's where a person's got their eyes closed and the hypnotist is suggesting to the subject, one arm has a balloon tied to it, raises up, one arm has a bucket of water, that more water is being added to it, and that comes down. And the more a person's arms move, the more the hypnotist knows that this person is greater and greater degrees of suggestibility. What I was saying before to 30-Day Jeff is, in my experience, in terms of doing this kind of sort of healing work from a spiritual aspect, we don't really even have to worry about that. We can all get where we need to go. The big issue would be, are there blocks, or the things blocking you? And back to spiritual entities, they can present a block to going into a past life, to going into the life between lives, to even doing a present day regression to an earlier time. And my belief is the reason they block you is because they know, all right, now this person's has entered onto a healing path. If they're successful with this, then his body, his energetic spirit, is no longer going to be a hospitable home for me, and I'm going to be back out on the street, and they don't want that. And so they can kind of disrupt different things in your life when you start moving in a healthy direction. And you just have to wonder, how many people who are trying to lose weight are actually dealing with a spiritual entity? How many people trying to quit drinking alcohol, or quit doing drugs, or quit being in crappy relationships actually have spiritual entities with them that are pushing them in this unhealthy, negative direction? I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I'm not saying I have the answer to it, but I have definitely seen that more than a number of times. Okay. Oh, that's so sweet. Catherine is saying, you have a beautiful way of explaining things. Thank you so much for that, Catherine. Sincerely appreciate it. So Elaine Bao is saying, I am loaded with programs. So confused. Okay, Elaine, if you can just elaborate on what you mean by that. I'm loaded with programs. Are you talking about mental thought programs, patterns? Are you talking about something else? So if you can explain that a little bit more, I might be able to add my 2 cents. Alrighty. Here is Amy McFarland. We are spiritually connected. Good evening. I'm so glad I made it. I'm glad you made it too, Amy. Welcome. Ajna is saying, hearing some voices in different languages and feeling the presence of something, is that yes? What's the next step? Yeah, I mean, that would be enough to be pretty suspicious that you have one or more entities attached to you. The simplest next step you could take would be to use a pendulum. Go to my video on using a pendulum on this channel and follow the instructions for how to get a yes, no, and maybe answer, and then start asking questions to determine if you have a spiritual entity attached to you, or if you have multiple spiritual entities attached to you. That would be the next step I would take if I were you. All right. Thanks for asking. And here is Masa Bars. On 2 occasions, I felt a spirit climbing into bed next to me. It scared me so much I couldn't move. I did use my pendulum, and it was a spirit and not sleep paralysis. Okay, so the next step would probably, in that case, I think if I were working with you, I would want to know if that spirit, if that entity is actually attached to you, or if they're attached to your house. That could be. And I'd want to know, are there any other spirits attached to you? So we know kind of the totality of what we're dealing with. The next thing I would want to know is, who is this entity that's climbing into bed with you? Is it somebody you knew in this life? Is it somebody you knew in a past life? Is it someone who lived in that house? Because we would definitely want to move them on into the light, right? The beautiful thing about this kind of work is that you're not just benefiting by removing this entity that's attached itself to you. You're also benefiting the entity themselves by helping them go into the light. Once they go into the light, they're not going to reattach to you, and they're not going to reattach to anybody else. All right. Thanks, Maza. Oh, okay. So Amy McFarland is asking the same question that's been asked a few times. How do you determine an attachment versus a possible mental illness? Well, actually, it's a little bit of a variation on the question. And I really think that this is a fascinating question. I have to wonder, over the centuries, over the millennia, how many people have we labeled as mentally, clinically, whatever, insane, who actually just were riddled with entities attached to them. And you can imagine that if you live in a culture like ours that doesn't accept the notion that you live on energetically after your physical body dies, that it would be easier to label people as crazy rather than saying, oh, they've got 40 entities attached to them, and these entities are all talking, and they're overwhelming the ability of this human in front of us to deal with this. So I don't know the answer to my hypothetical question of how many people have we labeled as being clinically insane who just have entities attached to them. But I suspect it's probably a pretty large number. And as to your question, how would you discern the difference between one and the other? Well, and I'm just asking questions. Maybe there is no difference. I don't know. And B, it depends on how stable or unstable that person is. I mean, if that person has periods of lucidity where they're in their own personality and they're calm and they're kind of rational, I suppose they could use a pendulum, right, to determine the answer to that question. If they're kind of not with us anymore in the sense of being able to have a conversation with you and being calm and rational, then you probably have to move into you using the pendulum and asking on their behalf. And that's not my preferred way of doing things, but that's possible as well. So you could try to do that. And if you got yes, they have attachments, you could actually work on their behalf. I've done this with parents and their children. So you could try that. But it's a really, really good question. And I think it deserves a lot more attention. And I suspect that as humanity progresses, and we become more open, if you will, to different possibilities, that there may be people and groups of people that begin to take this up, because I really think there's something to this. So thank you so much for asking the question. All right. Rosie Petals says, can different entities reattach themselves after others have been removed? Okay, so I think I know what you're asking here, which essentially is, if you have 3 entities attached to you and you remove all 3, can you have different entities other than those 3, like entities number 4, 5, and 6? Can they attach to you? And the answer is yes, they can. Can entities 1, 2, and 3 reattach? Yes, they can. That's why you want to send them into the light so they can't reattach themselves to you. And the key here has to do with frequency and harmony. So birds of a feather, it is said, flock together. Like attracts like. The reason why people who drink heavily tend to have spiritual entities attaching to them is that they're probably drinking heavily because they have anxiety, they have depression, they have guilt, they have shame, they have intense self-loathing, other kinds of negative emotions that are already vibrating at a low frequency. When a person gets drunk like that over and over again, the state is like a polluted state, which is a low vibration. Who is going to feel comfortable in that low vibration? These spiritual entities that refuse to go to the light. So you can already infer where I'm going with this, which is the solution to so many of our issues in our life is to raise up our energetic vibration to the vibration of compassion, forgiveness, love, grace, and so on, and keep it there as long as possible, because if you do that, you're not going to be an energetic match for an entity that's vibrating, where am I on the camera, vibrating at a lower frequency. You have to be down here for them to feel that they have found a hospitable home. They're not going to be comfortable rising up to this level. They can't rise up to that level right now. They're going to touch you and just go away. So if you have I'll go back to working with the hypothetical client, Susan, who had, I think I said 8 entities attached to her. Once we remove those entities, we want to do different things to help her heal from her own traumas, her own wounds, so that she can raise her vibration up. We want her exposed to healthy food, healthy water, music that raises up her vibration, surroundings that raise up her vibration, like being outside in nature, being in the sun. We want her listening to audio tracks that she is worthy of love, for example. All of these things to raise up that vibration and keep it there, because that's what's going to bring health across the board to her. So hopefully that makes sense to you. Alrighty. Ba, 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 ba. Let's see. Jill Turner says, thanks. The mind boggles. Yeah, it's a surreal thing to imagine you might have a gang of invisible beings squatting in your life force. That's true. That is true. And it's remarkable how easy it is to remove them once you determine that they're actually there. This universe, as far as I can tell, operates as a free will universe. And that means that at some point, you gave these entities permission to attach themselves to your body and or to your being. And so the process of removing them really has 2 elements to it. And the first element is directly related to the free will part. It's making it clear to them that they no longer have your permission to be attached to you. Right? That's the first part. And then the second part is understanding why they're attached to you in the first place, which is fear. Right? They didn't go to the light because of fear. So if you can be firm and tell them, get out, essentially, you don't have my permission anymore to be here. And because I'm telling you, you have to leave, you have to leave. And then the second one is compassion. And that is, I understand that you're terrified. I understand that you're frightened. And I can promise you that when you go into the light, you're going to be greeted by people who loved you in your lifetime. You're finally going to be home. My body's not your home. My energetic being is not your home. Your home is in the light. The reason you feel so lost is because you're not home. That's how you get home. And there are even cases with entities that are stubborn, where you can make a deal with them and you can say, are you willing to go into the light for 30 seconds? And then you can come right back if you want to. Just go for 30 seconds, and then I give you permission to come back, just so you can see what it's like. And they're like, yeah, sure, 30 seconds, of course. So they go for 30 seconds, and they feel so much love, just like people do when they report what it's like to have a near-death experience, that they don't want to come back. And then it's easy to let them go. So there's firmness on the one hand, and there's compassion on the other. And I think when you combine these 2, that's when you can be really successful. When I first started with this, I was all about that, yank them out and get a sword and cut the cords and all these other things, but you got to fight on your hands. And there's no reason for that, because you're dealing with essentially another human being. They just don't have a body and they're frightened. And being violent with somebody who's frightened just causes more resistance, and there's no reason for it. For 99% of the entities that you will find, you can through compassion and firmness, you can move them on. Okay. Let's see here. Kristen Hubbard, hello. Good to see you here. So Ajna says, okay, so how do you know if this entity that's attached is good or bad, or the situation can be worse? It's a great question. And I would say, based upon my experience, and I've got a lot of experience now, that it's extremely rare to run into something that is what we would call evil. That the overwhelming vast majority of the cases are simply people like you and me that don't have a physical body anymore, who are scared. Now, could they be creating something negative that we would want to label bad in your life? Yeah, they could. If you had somebody hanging off you all day long, or 3 people hanging off you all day long, telling you that you weren't smart, or the world is a terrible, scary place, or you should never forgive anyone, or you should eat every donut you come into, eat every donut you encounter, then yes, that would have negative impacts on your life. And those are the kinds of things that can happen. But I tend to focus less on the good and bad and more on those people are going to be better off in the light. You're going to be better off without them hanging on you. So let's send them home. It's a win-win situation. So hopefully that answered the question for you. Now, very, very, very infrequently, as I mentioned before, will I run into something that we would call evil. And that starts to get out of my area of expertise. What I know for sure is that creating and maintaining a high level of frequency is going to help you with any kind of entity that's attached to you. And if it gets really, really, really crazy, that's when you would probably start looking at like a Catholic priest for an exorcist or something. But that really just, I think that maybe has come up once, maybe twice in the 15 years that I've been doing this work. All right. Here is Jenny Lee. Jenny says, could I have entities attached to me that keep my guides out of reach? Yes, absolutely. And the way I would phrase that is close to what you said, but a little different, which would be it can block your ability to connect with your guides. It can block your ability to go into a past lifetime. It can block your ability to meet with your soulmate, because largely they know that once you're on a healing path, your energetic being, your physical being is not going to be a match for them anymore. It's not going to be a suitable home for them. And so they have the ability to kind of block things sometimes. So if that's the case, we want to know that. We want to move them out. Once you move them out, almost invariably, that's when you can meet, in your case, with your spirit guides, or you can have your past life regression, or you can do your life between lives, or you can meet your soulmate, or you can see the Akashic records and so on. So it's an awesome question. Thanks for asking. And I just want to see if I answered sort of all the questions that we were going to be dealing with. Yeah, it seems like we have. And I do have on my YouTube channel a 2-part series. I'm probably needing to update this too because it's about 3 years old. 2-part series on removing spiritual entities that are attached to you. So you can search for that on Blue Sky Hypnosis on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You get notified of all the content that I create, not just these lives, but also the static continuous content that I create for a variety of issues. So consider doing that. I want to take a couple more questions. Before I do, I just want to mention that next Friday, I guess that's going to be the 10th, we're going to be doing which we've done several times before, we're going to be doing an open roundtable. This is where you can come and ask any question you want on any topic that's germane to this channel. So if you're concerned about weight loss, if you're concerned about anxiety and stress, if you're concerned about public speaking, if you get consistent migraine headaches, talk with your doctor first, but come to me for kind of ancillary ways of dealing with that. What other things? Past life regression, life between lives, Akashic records, meeting your spirit guide, issues with relationships that English Rose was talking about that seem to help her and her husband. There are all kinds of things that we can discuss in this open forum. And it's just kind of a more of a free flow where we don't have to stay on one topic. We can hop between different topics. That'll be next Friday live at 5 Eastern US, right here, same bat channel. All right. So here's Steph Freeman Art that says, what does it mean when a voice says your name when you were in between sleep and awake? It startled me. Okay, so that in between sleep and awake can be thought of as a hypnotic state. And that seems to part the veil, right, between this 5-sense reality and everything else, all that exists. And that's why we use hypnosis to do all of the things that we talk about. So it depends on what that voice is saying and who the voice is. So the voice could be the voice of your spirit guide. It could be the voice of an entity attached to you. I would suggest using a pendulum and trying to ascertain whose voice is that? Because then you know kind of how to proceed from there. Alrighty. Here's Nicole. Hello, Nicole. Good to see you. This might sound crazy. When I'm at the cemetery, I say, okay, I am not the one for you to attach to. I can't help. I am sorry. Since I started that, I swear I'm lighter. I'm always nice. That's awesome. So yeah, you can almost think of it as contracts. I think we're constantly entering into spiritual contracts and we don't realize it. So if you say something at a cemetery, which is a place where you can receive attachments, if you say, I'm not available to help, I'm sorry, I can't help you, stay clear. My body's my body, my being is my being, and I've got the light of God around me. Probably a great thing to say. And you're feeling lighter, so obviously it's doing something. So good for you, and thanks for commenting. Here is Jenny. Jenny is saying, how do we properly manage to detach from these entities? Thanks so much for sharing. This is where that two-part video series on my channel comes in. Part one of removing spiritual attachments would be just understanding the concept, kind of like what we've talked about here today. Part two is the actual process of talking you through the process of removing these entities. In general, the way I do this is consistent with a person's religious or philosophical beliefs. We assemble a team of non-physical entities who are powerful, loving, we can trust. And then in the presence of these entities, we tell these loving entities, time has come for this entity or these entities that have attached themselves to me to leave. I'm making a declaration to you, I'm making a declaration to God, I'm making a declaration to the universe that they no longer have my permission to be attached, and therefore they have to go. Then I tell the entity, same thing, you don't have my permission anymore, you have to leave. And then I want to be sure that I am cognizant of the fact that they're attached to me because they're frightened. And I'm encouraging them to go into the light with, say, angels, that they're going home, that they're going to be greeted by people who love them in their lifetime. They have nothing to fear. This is going to remove probably 80%, 85% of them just like that. The remainder that may still be there, and they may not, but if there are any remaining, we want to know who they are. Did you know them in this lifetime? Did you know them in a past lifetime? What is your connection to them? Because you may have guilt or shame or something like that that's holding on to them. And if that's the case, we have to deal with you. We have to release that guilt and shame that you have before we can expect those entities to go. So a common example of this, and I'm not saying everyone who has an abortion feels this way, but people who have an abortion sometimes are holding on, unbeknownst to them, of guilt or shame for having the abortion. And if that's the case, we have to relieve that guilt and shame before they can let the soul or the spirit of the child go. So, great question. Hopefully the answer made sense. All right, I'm going to take one more, and then we're going to wish each other, a happy weekend. All right, let's see what we have here. So Nicole is actually answering here and saying, Jill, I did one of Peter's hypnosis release attachments on my own prior to watching a live on it. Then when he had one recently after, I was like, oh, wow, I have to be nice to them and not scream at them. Yes. If it's an evil entity, that's not really my bailiwick, but that's where I think you'd have the screaming. Compassion, right? You get more, was it more flies with honey or something? And you can imagine a really, really, really good police officer never has to use the mace or the gun or the stun gun or the baton. A really, really good police officer is able to use his or her voice and have compassion and understanding, and have the person walk out on their own and not have to drag them out and put them in handcuffs. Compassion. You're a human being, I'm a human being. We've both been scared at times. This entity is attached itself to you because it's scared. If you're firm and you say, look, this isn't your house, you got to get out. But P.S., I understand that you're scared, and there's a shelter right down the street that's going to help you. So much easier than calling them names and kicking them and punching them and trying to push them out where they're already afraid. Back to that analogy of a drowning person. If they're holding on to you because they're drowning, or let's say they're holding on to a life vest because they're drowning. They're in the middle of the ocean. and you say, give me that life vest, and you try to pull it away from them, they're going to fight you tooth and nail. But if you have a life raft and you say, here, take this life raft, which is like going into the light, now will you give me the life jacket? Of course they will, because the life raft is so much better than the life jacket. So thank you all so much for asking such great questions, for making such awesome comments, for participating, for showing up. I really appreciate this. And I hope you'll consider showing up next Friday live at 5, December 10th, where we're going to be doing this, this open roundtable. Have an awesome weekend, you guys. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And come next Friday with your questions and comments. We'll love to engage with you then. Take care and goodbye.